The Stack, a podcast for IT and MSP professionals, with your host, David Papp.
Welcome to the MSP Stack Podcast. I'm your host, David Papp. We're joined today by a very special guest, Tony Anscombe, the Chief Security Evangelist at ESET. Welcome, Tony.
Well, hi, David. It's great to be here on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Now, as your title implies, you're the security evangelist at ESET, which means that you're quite deep in the trenches there when it comes to, actually, I would like to say you're probably more the forest from the trees when it comes to the security aspect, which is exactly what we want to cover off here. Many people are upgrading their cybersecurity stacks right now. I feel they're realizing that what they have in place, they need to add additional layers to protect themselves, whether it's for insurance purposes, whether it's to protect their clients, protect their organizations, protect themselves. And one such topic that is being highly discussed right now and being added on by a lot of the MSPs is the EDR component. Let's start there.
Well, firstly, I like the way you described it, David, because you said in addition to. Because
yes.
At the start of this whole EDR, this new acronym that kind of floated around was, well, do I still need endpoint? And let's cover that one off first. You absolutely still need endpoint protection. So that EPP piece is so important because the way to think of this is endpoint protection is preventative. Yeah. Whereas EDR is it's happening now. So if you can prevent something from happening, it's a much better spot to be in than to have it happen and have to look to see what you're going to need to do right at this moment in time. So EDR is an important thing because if you think about how threats have changed, if we go back to last year, you saw vulnerabilities in, for example, Microsoft Exchange servers and stuff like that. And you saw in the US, the FBI go around clearing up some of the bits of code that cyber criminals left on those servers. And there is a great example of why you need EDR, because nothing malicious was running, but cyber criminals had left their snippets of code in there to come back to later.
Yes.
And that's why you need EDR, because it's where somebody has got into the network. They may not be doing anything particularly malicious. They may just be leaving things around. They may be going from one network to another, so laterally moving through the network and looking at threats. And suddenly, they might launch an attack at some stage. But you need to know what happened and where it happened and how it happened. But more to the point, you need to be able to detect it as it happened. So you need to look at those traffic anomalies, and it's no longer as easy as, there's an attachment in this email and it's malicious, so we'll delete it. It's kind of moved on a bit.
Yes. Excellent. So let's say that they have their basic cybersecurity software. They've installed that in place. They've added on this EDR component to their cybersecurity suite as another layer. I'm assuming that's not good enough, because what we want to achieve is this notion of XDR, right?
Yeah, if you think about all the devices that we're attaching, and this is only going to become worse, isn't it, as time moves on? Or maybe worse is the wrong word. Maybe this just extends over, becomes broader. If you think of all the things that we're going to attach, sensors to our networks, or whether it's other devices, or you're using cloud infrastructure now, and you're using all these other places that are connecting into your own system. XDR is that extension of EDR to include things like cloud, etc. And if you think across the pandemic, our use of cloud services as employees of companies has extended massively, isn't it? It's, half of what we do now is up in the cloud, or it's virtual or remote or hybrid. And so it's no longer just about the endpoint. It's about protecting all those other services and how everything else that connects as well. And like I say, I can see that becoming more and more complex as time goes on.
Yeah. One confusion I'm seeing a lot, though, is a lot of MSPs, or especially the technically oriented people, they get caught, instead of being in what I call the marketing land of fluffy words, they get more caught up by the actual specifications than technical jargon of does it support X, Y, and Z. So is it possible, in your opinion, to compare EDR from EDR between vendors, and better yet, XDR from XDR between vendors? Are those apple to apples type comparisons?
Well, I think that becomes complicated, doesn't it? Because different companies will have different definitions, unfortunately, of what these terms mean, and there's no real defined stake in the ground. So I think you've got to look at each vendor's individual solution and work out whether actually it meets the requirements of your business environment. And one of the things, there's you see a lot of EDR or XDR products on the market that from companies that don't have endpoint protection, where to me, actually, this is a combined solution. You want something that actually is reporting both, because one part of your operation might see in endpoint protection, so i.e. a preventative detection, might actually, that intelligence might help on the other side of the organization, where actually you're seeing something in a log file or some activity has been picked up somewhere else in the network by an EDR client. So actually, I think it's important that these solutions have a combined offering.
I agree with that. So now the new term that you and I had briefly mentioned before the call was this whole idea of there's an evolution now to not just having the tools in place and having them do their thing, but this notion of MDR. It's now taking this to the next level and managing this and being proactive with it.
Well, let's think about cybersecurity just for a moment. Let's step back for one moment. I mean, you can create cybersecurity for what I define as from a factory floor perspective. And what I mean by that is you can create a product or a solution that kind of, it's the conveyor belt of threats that go past. Yeah, and you can teach the robot on the factory floor to take the threat that, the bad chocolates off the production line, if we want to turn it that way. But one thing you can't do is, the person standing on the end of the quality assurance line is the expert. So having human interaction and having people actually involved in the management and bringing in that expertise is a super important component. So MDR kind of brings that human touch. It brings that real-time management into play. It brings somebody else in there to look at the threats 24/7 as they're actually happening. And I think that's a super important part. And that's where actually somebody like us, ESET, is a major player in here, because if you look at ESET, as you know, David, we're very much a research-focused company. So if you look at if you looked at the number of employees we have, from research, from development, and then the rest of the organization, you'll see that actually we're very much the company we started as was a group of very technology-orientated individuals actually taking apart malware, looking under the hood, so to speak, looking to see how it works, what its motivations are. And that helps you later on, because you see that reappear, people copy, or other, the threat evolves into different ways. So I think that's a super important part, and having access to those type of experts is super important. And you want to get your cybersecurity off of the production line to a certain degree. You need to have that human component actually overseeing it.
Absolutely. There's definitely been an evolution in terms of looking at just basic signatures that you're matching to evolving to the organization as a whole and looking for patterns and maybe applying some artificial intelligence or something else to that. And then there's, as you indicate, the human element on that as well to make some very intelligent decisions and maybe even do some reactions if needed in a certain situation.
Well, absolutely. And, the point of having technology in there analyzing all this data is that actually the technology through algorithms can actually surface the important parts, so that actually when the important things are being looked at by not only the internal team, but also an external team if that's the route you've gone down.
Yeah.
And the mundane stuff can be handled by that automation. That can still be on that conveyor belt of cybersecurity.
Yeah. We can call that the noise now.
We call that the noise. Okay.
Yeah, you cut through the noise because it's always going to be there.
Yes.
Excellent.
You're listening to The Stack.
Thanks to cybersecurity leader ESET for sponsoring the podcast. ESET delivers award-winning cybersecurity technology to protect all aspects of your digital life with cutting-edge expertise and advanced machine learning to secure Windows, Mac OS, and Android devices. ESET bundles antivirus, anti-spyware, device control, web filtering, two-way firewall, anti-spam, remote management, and two-factor authentication solutions, and is a recognized leader in home and business cybersecurity solutions.
What's in your stack?
So it sounds like, from what I understand, that MSPs really need to take a good look at what they are implementing for the various layers of security that they have in place. Do they have just basic cybersecurity software in place, the endpoint protection, as you indicated, the EDR component that we can stitch on, what they might evolve beyond that into an XDR framework philosophy and stitching on, maybe they want to go into managed MDR or even having a SOC in place, which we're seeing some organizations going full on. So what suggestion would you have or recommendation to MSPs right now? Like, in my opinion, when I talk to MSPs, I say the risks of running an MSP are growing every year. And it's getting to the point we're noticing with a lot of MSPs that even just getting basic insurance every year is becoming more expensive and more difficult. And they're asking you questions about your stack and what you have in place for your cybersecurity measures. So what suggestion, recommendation do you have? Or do you have a crystal ball that you want to look at what this looks like for the next, say, 1 to 3 years?
Well, I do wish I had that crystal ball. Firstly, I'd look up next week's lottery numbers. But anyway, that's to a side. So what would be my recommendation? Well, firstly, let's look at the shift in that market. I mean, you kind of said it, that large organizations and et cetera, right? Firstly, if I look in my crystal ball, this is coming down to a lot of what I define as mid-size or even small businesses. I think actually, if you're looking for cyber risk insurance at some stage, even if you're a 50-person business, they're going to turn around and say, at some stage, do you have EDR or such like? But that it's not about insurance dictating what you need. It's also about your need to have it. So, as these threats become more advanced and these threats become more stealthy in that way, more APT-like, if that's the right way to term it, then actually EDR becomes an essential component. So, firstly, I think this is not an enterprise solution. This is coming down, and it's going to be a small business. Yeah, at some stage, it will be a small business solution.
Agreed.
Yeah,
mandatory solution.
Yes,
if you want to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you're an MSP, I mean, you're also part of the solution for the massive resource problem the cybersecurity industry has. I mean, I've seen so many different numbers on lack of resources. Is it 600,000? Is it 2 million? I don't know, but I do know that finding talented people to sit in cybersecurity seats and analyze logs and do that type of thing, you're going to struggle. Yeah. So as an MSP, this is a huge value add. Yeah. To actually step in, turn around and show that actually you need this type of protection going forward over the next 2 to 3 years. This should be a mandatory component in every business. Yeah. And you need to have the people and resources. Yeah. So as an MSP, if you're providing that additional layer of service on top, to actually understand what's going on and help the customer, protect the customer. So to me, this is a huge business opportunity actually for an MSP.
So you touched on an important point, and it's something that we've been discussing quite a bit lately, is that I don't think that smaller MSPs are going to be able to survive, and they need by themselves, and they need to partner with other service providers in the industry who specialize in certain fields, like an MSSP or a SOC or an MDR solution or whatever it is on the cybersecurity side. You just can't simply do it yourself. And I feel that is going to be the future of all of these smaller MSPs as they realize that it's just too much to take on by themselves.
I agree. It generally, however, it really depends on what the goal of that MSP is. I mean, if that MSP has a niche set of 20 customers and I was going to say the mum and pop shop MSP that still has that vision that I don't want to grow to 300 customers, and I don't want big enterprises in there. Yeah. And I want to service these 20 customers really well. Yeah. Then actually, I think there's probably a good place for them, especially if they've got the right technical talent. And remember, a lot of those smaller organizations typically are founded by somebody with that talent.
Absolutely. It's still difficult, though, to keep on top of everything, I feel. And at the very minimum, you should be part of peer groups and other organizations to team. One thing I've always compared it to is the medical industry as an example, where the doctors they're part of a pool of other doctors to take turns being on call. And I always wondered if that'd be a neat notion for the MSP industry to take turns to be on call, because really this is not a 9-to-5 business anymore in terms of the protection and cybersecurity aspect. And you really need to be thinking of what your 24/7 footprint looks like.
Well, the other important part there is also that they work with vendors like us at ESET, where actually when something lands in that log file or some alert appears in the system, that actually they've got somebody to back it off to.
Excellent. Right. Good point. That is a very good point. Well, I like to wrap up all of my podcast interviews with just if somebody didn't listen to the entire podcast and they only caught one thing, one tip, one idea, I call it a power tip, what would that be? I'm putting you on the spot.
You are definitely putting me on the spot there, David. Well, I think my one tip there is if you haven't looked at EDR or XDR now, you should be. It's essential, I think, that actually all businesses, even if they're not going to deploy it immediately, at least have an understanding of what it is and get it in the budget and have that plan to implement over the next period of time.
Excellent. Solid advice. Thank you very much, Tony, for joining this. Honestly, this was a lot of fun. This was great information. And I think it's a hot topic that's just going to become more and more important over time.
I completely agree, David. And it's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the MSP Stack Podcast. Remember, if you liked it, hit thumbs up. If you didn't like it, hit thumbs down twice. If you'd like to be on the show, head on over to the MSPstack.com and click on the Be a Guest button. The Stack is made possible through the generous support of MSP Corp. What's in your stack?